You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 96, Queen Anne Killer Unidentified, the Michael Olds story. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Earl Green.
And I'm Ashley Thomas.
Each week on Mission Log Gene-ology, we roll the tape and look at eyewitness accounts to see whether the morals, meanings, and messages that Gene Roddenberry put into Star Trek first appeared in his earliest TV writing.
Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek morals, meanings, and messages identified.
Something like that. Today we're seeing who's breaking the law.
Breaking the law.
On the one episode Gene Roddenberry contributed to Lee Marvin's Lawbreaker.
Before we get to trivia on this week's episode, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon or follow us on YouTube or leave a review wherever you're listening to us. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show, aka the VAM, and our private Discord where you can interact with us, your hosts, Earl and me, as well as the other Roddenberry Podcast hosts during scheduled live chats, along with occasional screenings, including Gene-ology After Dark. You can access all of this for just a mere $1 a month, so head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation. By the way, folks, those reviews really do help our shows way more than you could possibly know. Even if you can't come up with the words for a written review, a 5-star rating, and no less than 5, folks. Please, give us that 5-star rating. It really goes a long way to tell the algorithm that you like us, you love us, you want some more of us, and that other folks might like, love, and want more of us, too. We are counting on our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word. And now, this week's trivia! Earl, have you identified some trivia for us today?
Well, I've identified quite a bit, but boy, this goes down some rabbit holes, but it's the trivia. I think y'all are accustomed to that.
I mean, it's Gene-ology. You are accustomed to that.
This whole show is a rabbit hole. It's a series of rabbit holes.
Indeed.
It's a series of tubes.
I love it. I love it.
We have finally arrived at the point where Gene does not need to write for other people's shows anymore. This is the last time Gene Roddenberry would write for a show he did not create, bearing in mind that the reuse of his Virginian script is still yet to come as a 1971 episode of Alias Smith & Jones, but more on that last week. After this, Gene is Gene Roddenberry, creator and executive producer of The Lieutenant. This is Gene's very last fresh credit on someone else's show, and that's something of a milestone. The series, originating from United Artists, was made for the syndication market, and you can think of it as a forerunner to shows like America's Most Wanted. Lee Marvin tried to lend gravitas and authority, and honestly tried very hard to look like he was still interested, in the introductions to each week's case and the narration thereof, which were drawn from the files of various police agencies around the United States. Each half-hour show dramatized that case, interspersing news film with specially shot recreations of actors portraying the various people involved, punctuated by scenes of Lee Marvin interacting with the chief of that particular police force or someone else on a kind of high-tech view screen that implied a far more advanced surveillance state than what was actually in existence in the U.S. in 1962. It would play very differently now, I gotta tell you. The show was known variously as Lawbreakers, or Lee Marvin's Lawbreakers, or Lee Marvin Presents Lawbreaker, with each episode carrying a seal of endorsement from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. There are even multiple names on file for this episode alone between various websites, the Library of Congress, the DVD set, we'll get back to that in a second, and Gene's biography. We settled on the most frequently used combination of titles for the purposes of this podcast. It's still a bit of a mouthful. And yes, this show is actually available as a commercially available DVD box set, which may be out of print, but is probably not exactly a highly sought-after collector's item, so you should still be able to track it down if you like. Episodes have occasionally shown up on YouTube, but to the best of our knowledge, not this one. Lawbreaker/Lawbreakers began its run in 1963 right alongside NBC's launch of The Lieutenant, and would conclude its single syndicated season on the air in 1964. It premiered on September 20th, 1963, 5 months after Gene's episode of The Virginian, and just 1 day before the second episode of The Lieutenant. It's the last of the red-hot paycheck gigs. Michael Van Dever portrays Michael Olds in, according to the end credits, sequences other than the state penitentiary and the district attorney's office. Michael Van Dever is the only cast member credited on screen. You might remember him from the Purple Testament episode of The Twilight Zone. You might remember him as Mad Dog in the 1966 Adam West Batman series. Or, how is this for a coincidence? He just played Jody Swenson, youngest son of the notorious Carl Swenson in Runaway Home, Gene's episode of The Virginian, which we covered in the previous podcast. Michael made 2 later guest-starring appearances on The Virginian and appeared in such shows as Mannix, Streets of San Francisco, and Macmillan and Wife, until he hung up the acting shoes in 1978 to become the president of a company that sold, and I quote, authentic European cobblestones. We lost Michael in 2021. Going uncredited is Noreen Hartsfeld as the episode's murder victim and Paul Garvin as the grocer. It's the only credit under Noreen's name on IMDb. Paul doesn't get a credit at all. But the reason for that is revealed in Lee Marvin's voiceover. In the closing credits, both Noreen and Paul were police officers taking part in the reenactment. We'll have more to say about that later, too. Even more than Gene's episode of G.E. True, this final freelance gig can definitely fit in comfortably with the true crime genre, and the case of Michael Andrew Olds was very much a real one. But only part of the story was told in this half hour of TV. When he was paroled in the 70s, Olds had not turned over a new leaf. He kidnapped several people and murdered 2 more, and this time found less leniency in the courts, given 2 life sentences with no possibility of parole. So be aware that there's more where this story came from, and that story does not get any better. As such, and due to the format of the show we're covering, which really didn't have a lot of dialogue, we will be foregoing the usual dramatic scene reenactment on our end and going straight into the recap.
Queen Anne Killer Unidentified, the Michael Olds story. Act 1. Seattle, Washington, March 28th. In the shadow of the Space Needle, a symbol of progress, evil looms in the darkness, challenging whether we've really progressed all that much at all. Michael Olds, a young man who is now serving a life sentence, describes how he held up a grocery store, firing 2 shots and killing 1 woman. Next is Officer Harold Countryman of the Seattle Police. Harold made a mistake that could have been fatal. We go to Seattle, Washington this week to see the controversial Queen Anne murder case. We'll see where it happened, the people involved, but what we won't find is why it happened. Act 2. What you're about to see hits its climax on April 4th, but we're starting 8 days earlier on March 28th. Our first interview is with Michael Olds himself. We find him in the maximum security area of the state penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. Was the robbery planned or unplanned? Did you need the money, Michael, or did you do it for the bragging rights? Michael didn't plan on it. It didn't occur to him to do it until one night when he invited a couple of friends over for some poker. He'd lost some money to them before and wanted to try to get it back. Lady Luck wasn't with Olds that night. Just 2 years before, he had gone out and choked a small boy and left him for dead. Tonight, he hesitates. Is he thinking back to a previous crime, or is he about to commit another one? Michael walks down the street and finds himself at the store. Mrs. Alfred Brom, housewife and mother of 2, enters ahead of Michael for some routine shopping. Unfortunately, this trip will be anything but routine. Michael enters brandishing his gun and tells the grocer to put all the money in the sack. Mrs. Brom drops a can and Michael tells her to get behind the counter with the grocer. As he grabs the money and exits, Michael fires 2 shots and Mrs. Bram hits the ground. He would later say that he thought the grocer moved or something, but why the second shot? Michael takes off, running as fast as he can to get out of sight. He hightails it back to his house, hiding the money under some cardboard boxes in the garage, and reserves 2 half-dollar pieces for himself, just enough to get back in the poker game. Dick Schumer of the Homicide Division of the Seattle Police was one of the first people on the scene. Schumer felt that they were dealing with someone who was very mentally ill or someone who was triggered very easily. The grocer was able to give a description of Olds. Deepening the tragedy, Michael knew Mrs. Brom's husband. He had taught him how to bowl. Mr. Brom recounts how he found out the news. He had taken his youngest boy to the movies when he was summoned by his employer at the bowling alley to come quickly. He and his youngest went, thinking there might have been something wrong with his other son, but when he arrived, he was told to go to the grocery store, where the police told him that his wife was dead. Michael recounts what he did that night after the robbery and murder. He had trouble sleeping, trying not to think too hard what had happened. Act 3. Who is Michael Olds anyway? Let's look at the tape. Michael's mother recounts the circumstances under which he was born. After Michael was arrested, the paper reported that he was born to an unmarried mother at age 14. What the paper didn't say was that she had Michael at 14 after she was assaulted. Up until a week before he was born, she didn't truly understand what had happened to her or how Michael would be born. Michael was placed in foster care, and then he was placed in 17 different foster homes in total. It had been 10 years since she had last had contact with her son. Bill Pendergast of the Seattle Police Department Homicide Division suspected that Olds would move to attack again. At the time, the suspect was unknown, and due to the nature of the crime, it was unclear if he was a sadist, a psychopath, or if this was just some random act of violence. The police are following every lead by air, land, and sea, but nothing has turned up. Michael is hiding in plain sight, though, working as a stock boy, talking with people about the case, and even joking when a colleague noticed that Michael looks like the police composite sketch in the paper. Officer Countryman clocks in at work the night of April 4th. Seemed routine for Officer Countryman, but not to Michael Olds. When asked about whether or not he felt any remorse, or if he wanted to get out and do harm, Olds described himself as itchy to get out and do something like that again, this time robbing another store. Olds catches a cab after his second robbery, and partially through the ride, he holds up the driver, asking him to give him all this money. Asking the driver if he knows about the murder case, Olds brags that he did it. Olds fires a hole through the ashtray in the door, demonstrating his seriousness. He tells him to take him to the Queen Anne neighborhood. As he exits the vehicle, Olds tells the driver to stay put for the next 5 minutes. No moving. He dusts the vehicle to remove his fingerprints and makes a break for it. After Olds is out of sight, the cab driver calls it in. Police were dispatched to the cab, where the driver gives a description of Olds and what had happened. Realizing the description matches their suspect, Pendergast calls it into dispatch. They've got an approximate area and a description. They might just get lucky and catch him. Officers move into the area and begin their search. Officer Countryman turns into the alley following Olds, but he has failed to draw his gun. He has to keep his spotlight in Michael's eyes while simultaneously radioing for help without him knowing he's not got his weapon trained on him. Officer Countryman tells Michael he's going to keep the spotlight on his eyes until he drops it. If he doesn't, he'll shoot. Michael slowly lowers the gun. When it hits the ground, Officer Countryman tells him to stand facing the wall. Michael complies and feels foolish as he notices the officer doesn't even have his gun out. He's arrested as other patrol cars surround him, offering him no escape. Michael Olds recounts that after he confessed, he felt drowsy and scared. Knowing now that he would have to stand trial made him feel humbled and rotten. Michael grew up without parents, lived in 17 different foster homes, and now he's in a state penitentiary. Michael's mother saw very little of him while he was in foster care, but she says that she has never had any doubt of her son's innocence. An officer not quick enough to draw his gun, but with enough guts to work out his own mistake. A police officer that accepts crises as routine without panic or delay. A criminal who, you tell me. 17 different foster homes can give you 17 sets of values. 17 ways of life that can all be conflicting in a young mind. Or it can give you 17 ways to make good, all of them failing. What's your opinion? Think about that for a moment. Frank C. Raymond, Chief of Police, Seattle, Washington, had this to say. Michael Andrew Olds was sentenced to the state penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. Some may be stopped by an officer with a gun. Some must be stopped earlier before a serious crime is committed. Perhaps someone contemplating a crime will see a film such as this one and think twice before he ruins his own life and jeopardizes the lives of others. Officer Raymond concludes with a plea to support the police department in their endeavors to protect the community. The end.
Well done, Ashley. A very atypical recap for a very atypical show. In the research leading up to this, there was zero information about this show, and then I found out a little more, and then I found out a little more, and then I found out, oh, it's like actually available. I could just go buy this.
Yeah.
And then I actually watched it, and really the overriding thought was, what is Gene doing on this show? So this line that Lee Marvin has, this is the actual record of what happened, as it happened, and where it happened. What we don't know is why it happened. Okay, we're almost like in that, it's almost like a line from Spinal Tap.
Yes.
I wasn't expecting much in the way of funny observations here, but I could not help but mentally superimposing Leslie Nielsen over Lee Marvin for that line.
This was something kind of interesting to me. I believe you compared it to, like true crime, something along the lines of unsolved mysteries and that sort of thing. This is like unsolved mysteries, but they're solved, and two, it doesn't have the terrifying theme song that sends, 8-year-old me screaming from the room. I mean, the music is very moody, though. Like, I didn't catch who did the score, did you?
I did not, and I saw there was a music director in the credits, but I didn't really clock a specific composer. So I have a feeling that this person probably composed and recorded a library of stuff that they just reused throughout the season.
Gotcha.
That is a very typical cost-saving measure for this kind of show, is they record music for various moods, and they just free time it because there is no footage to match it to. It is not episode-specific.
Right.
It will show up every week.
Right. This one was the episode 0. This was the pilot episode.
Well, that's...
Question mark.
It's kind of interesting. It says that on IMDb. I find different sources saying that this was either the first or second episode aired.
Interesting.
Now, at the end of the episode, there is a montage. Gotta have a montage. Exciting footage from upcoming episodes of Lee Marvin's The Lawbreakers. And that really strikes me as an episode 1 kind of thing. I don't know where to land. Was this episode 1 or episode 2? But something like that is definitely an early episode endeavor. And it is on the DVD set with an air date. It's not like it's a pilot that didn't show. This pilot did get shown. But it is so tonally different from anything else we've covered in Gene-ology. Man, Gene really needed to buy some groceries, didn't he?
Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. This is a real thing that Gene is having to adapt, I guess, for like the reenacted parts. Yeah. And then, kind of scripting, I guess, how Lee Marvin cuts between the real footage and like the asking the questions of the real footage. Like, we're talking on, 1960s Zoom. Otherwise I'm like, yeah, this is definitely something that is well beneath Gene's capability. And yeah, so this is somebody throwing him a bone so he can grab a paycheck before the lieutenant hits the air. So
this may well have been the pilot. The information on this show is so thin that we're kind of having to surmise on some of this stuff.
Yeah, we are making educated guesses based on the material that we have available.
This is airing in September 1963.
Okay.
Lee Marvin's intro continues after the first commercial break, and he is citing dates as, this happened on February something, March something. Not bothering to say the year.
Yes, that was a big question I had, is could we find the year for this?
1962, maybe. It was recent. But the fact that they're not even bothering to tack the year on there, to me, that really felt like a tell of how disposable this show was considered. Which further made me think, it's kind of amazing that this is not only preserved, But you can just go buy it on DVD. You can buy the whole show.
Yeah. I mean, when so many other things that are more in demand are totally unavailable. Like, here you can buy this rando thing. Something I noticed, for as kind of, I don't want to say bland, but also like very inexpensively done, we're going to hire police officers to play themselves in a reenactment. I thought some of the set decoration and set choices were actually really interesting. So one thing I noticed, because this is a weird thing I notice, as Michael is walking to the grocery store to, commit this particular crime, he passes Cain Company, as in, like, Cain and Abel. Is that a real place, or is this set decor? Because, the kind of the ominous thing about, like, a troubled sun, like, thematically, that fits really well. I thought that was a really interesting choice. Whether that was on purpose.
Missed that. Wow.
Yeah. And the only reason I caught it is, as I was writing recap, I paused so I could write something down, and then I looked back up at the screen, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. The other thing I noticed was as Officer Countryman was walking in for his shift on that fateful night where he catches Michael, inscription on the exterior of the building is Proverbs 29:18, which in the New King in the King James, which is what's printed there, reads, "Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he." I don't know if that's a real police building or if that's a set, but this idea of, Michael being a man without vision who has been bounced around between 17 different foster homes, raised by a teen mother for a little bit who gave him up because she couldn't care for him, had very little contact with him. This is a guy without vision. In the context of that scripture, I went and looked at a bunch of other translations, and that's talking more specifically about prophetic vision from, like, an Old Testament prophet versus having a vision of what you want to do with your life and what direction you want to take or whatever. But it's that same kind of principle. Like, if you don't have that vision, you fall into lawlessness, is kind of how the rest of that verse is interpreted. Or translated, it should be, it's a choice of words I should use. Other translations extrapolate it like that. And so I thought that is like, is that just what happened to be on that building they used? Or is that purposeful set decoration? Because that really fits thematically with this story.
My gut feeling tells me that they were probably filming on location in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And probably did not put much of any thought or budget into stuff like set decor. So, as interesting as these are, they're probably what was actually there, including the Cain brothers. But it could be that, if you have a cameraman spot that, they're like, oh.
That's a good catch. Gonna give props to director of photography Brick Marquardt. What a name!
Boy, that's like slab beefcake. I mean, that's
I
like
know.
something
It's
out
like
of
that's
MST3K.
that's a manly dude who knows how to hold a boom mic and tell the camera where to go. So
big, McLarge, huge.
So props to you, Brick Marquardt, for if that was a happy accident, you caught it on the tape, and that's what we needed. Well done.
Yeah, well, that's the job description, especially if you are going back to recent Mission Log supplemental with Tim Russ. A lot of his directing gigs have been uncredited or barely credited dramatic recreations for true crime shows.
Wow.
Someone's got to do it. It's a job that exists.
Yeah.
And if you're good at it, like Tim or Brick, you get to do it again.
Yeah. I want to make mention that Brick Marquardt was the cinematographer on the 1974 film Foxy Brown.
I feel like, that sign is probably hanging outside the Seattle PD or something. Yeah. At least it's not a misquote of George Washington this time.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
But it's, part of the job with these recreations. Yeah, because this is a genre we haven't touched. On this show, and we'll never touch again, for the record.
Yeah.
Part of the job is to spot stuff like that has some resonance with the story that you're telling.
Yeah. I just thought, like, wow, for as low budget as this show probably was, and, you know, as you mentioned, like, it felt really disposable, this was some really good cinematography work for, you know, working with not much, if anything at all. So I thought that was really cool. Again, I don't know if this was footage, if this was getting the real people to tell their story about how certain things went down or whatever, but I was really bothered by how nonchalantly Mr. Brahm retold the story of learning his wife was murdered. It was like he was recounting, like, oh, his trip to the grocery store last Tuesday. Which, I mean, I say that, and sadly his wife was murdered on a trip to the grocery store. So, you know, there was no emotion there. And I get that, you know, men at that time were not permitted to show much emotion, if at all, but I felt like Lee Marvin had more, like, emotion in his very stern, by the books, is like, a family changed forever. Like, it felt like there was more, like, emotion there than the actual guy whose wife died.
Well, I feel like all of this was probably, in the credits, they note that that there was footage provided by King TV, KING TV in Seattle. Right. I feel like some of this was probably gathered as part of their news coverage of these events.
Sure, yeah.
And at some point, even as recent as it seemed, I am sure that, you know, having been questioned, having been given deposition, having gone to court and told this story.
Yeah.
One more guy comes along and sticks a camera in your face, tell us the story again. At some point, it starts to sound like the grocery list.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I do feel like there is a very high likelihood that Lee Marvin's stuff was shot last.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so he was probably directed to, okay, this guy's interview is strangely flat, pour it on.
Yeah.
But even there, I have questions about Lee Marvin's part of this, because he speaks very clearly. He enunciates when he's on camera. But once you get into the show, he sounds like he's a network TV golf announcer. Michael Olds is going to commit murder on the long drive to the 10th hole. You know, and it's just, okay, that's a choice. Mm-hmm. Kind of a weird choice, but okay. But, you know, some of the footage tells you why you have to have someone like Lee Marvin in this, because, you know, the first policeman they talk to, this man is a police officer, he's not an actor. Then the guy opens his mouth, and the audience is like, yeah, we could tell. Mm-hmm. Which, public speaking, is not this cop's job.
Right.
There's an almost Gomer Pyle of Seattle quality to the guy opening his mouth and saying words.
Yeah. I did think it was an interesting choice to have the actual cops come in and, you know, just reenact how the scene went down. So, I mean, at least you got somebody that lived it. It was interesting to at least have them do that, even if, you know, the acting stuff was, you know, it's not actor quality, because these people aren't actors.
Yeah, and that really shows in the grocery store reenactment, because now, of course, we find out over the end credits, the grocer and the customer were played by, you know, off-duty cops. The man shows absolutely no reaction to this lady getting gunned down.
None. And like, the only kind of reaction I noticed from him at all was when Michael first enters the store, puts the gun on him and says, load up that bag. And he's kind of like pauses, and he sees hands shake a little bit. But that's as far as we get on the acting. Rest of the time he's like silent, non-emotive, put cash in bag. Would you like fries with that? Like, you know.
But in the meantime, the weird thing about that scene is Michael, you know, the reenactor, the guy who was just in the Virginian, pulls the gun on him and then keeps the gun pointing in that direction where the guy was just standing. He's pointing the gun at empty space.
He's about to do a trick shot.
So there's a mishmash of, like you said, really brilliant spots on location, like, oh, Kane Brothers, and yet there's stuff like this that's like, okay? Okay, one very cool touch in the editing of this. Lee Marvin's part in this is what is produced last. because he is coming in and reacting to already filmed interviews that either came from the local TV station. And these news interviews are all on film because it was all on film back then.
Yeah.
Even TV news, because you did not have portable video cameras yet in 62, 63.
Right.
So it's all on film. So it's all got kind of the same grain to it.
Mm-hmm.
But Lee Marvin is questioning another one of these actual cops involved in the case. And this guy has a very start and stop speaking style, not a polished public speaker. Again, no reason to expect a police officer to be that. Mm-hmm. But then he is describing the suspect, and then suddenly they change back to the poker game, and that cop's voice is coming over the radio.
Yeah.
As the description, I was like, oh, now that was clever.
Yes.
That was really clever.
Yes.
And I will shut up now before I go down the inevitable rabbit hole of diegetic versus non-diegetic sound in an audio-visual work of fiction, because I always find it entertaining when someone finds clever ways to flip that on its head.
Yeah. I really liked that. I also liked looking at that clock radio they had going on. That was a fun little piece of retro tech that made me very happy to observe.
You know, there were a lot of retro reference points that camera could have lingered on a bit longer, and I would have been happy with it, whether it was that clock radio or the signage in that store. They had that very specific hand-drawn font. This seemed to be on everything in the 60s, so this had to be something that was in a printing press somewhere. And yet it all looks so hand-drawn.
Yeah. All of it looked really cool. I tried to read a little bit of the one behind the grocer's head. It was like something famous Italian something or another, but it had that really nice, like aesthetically pleasing font. So yeah, I liked it. It's cool.
Coming back from the commercial break, about halfway through the show, Lee Marvin's all like, an unknown man walks into a store. Minutes later, a woman is dead. Boy, that's a real bummer coming back from the commercial. Lee, can you preface that with, stop me if you've heard this one before?
Right. Yeah.
I briefly wondered if Officer Countryman's ride-along partners were Officer's Friend and Officer Roman.
I was wondering if his ride-along partner was Officer Cityman.
Then Lee Marvin tells us Countryman is a one-man patrol car, and I'm like, wait a minute, John Egan was 1930s. Did you people not watch G.E. True?
Apparently not. Apparently they didn't have these laws in Seattle that you got to have a buddy riding along, especially when you're chasing down a murderer.
Yeah, I guess that's just New York stuff.
Yeah, whatevs.
Now, as far as details of the case, I'm assuming this is accurate, but hey, buddy, I just left fingerprints all over your wallet, but hand me something to dust my prints off the upholstery of the taxi cab. Okay, sorry, Olds, gotta dock you points for thinking ahead there because you missed something.
Yeah, missed something. Also, would a feather duster really do that much to dust off fingerprints? I didn't think so. Nothing else, you're just throwing dirt on them so they're easier to see, buddy. Yeah. Goodness gracious. Yeah.
While the APB is being issued on the radio, and we're showing all the squad cars in action, then out of nowhere, the Seattle PD patrol boat. Okay, we're back on patrol boat. Well, we thought we were done with patrol boat. It's back.
No, land, air, and sea.
Brick brought back footage of a patrol boat. Let's work it in there somewhere, because we don't want to let Brick down.
No.
This is going to seem like a rabbit hole for a second, but please bear with me. Not a lot of folks listening to the show may know this, but at one point early in college, I was angling for a journalism degree. I did not stay with that area of specialization for reasons, but I was already working in broadcasting by that point, so it was like, yeah, why do I need this? Oh, if younger me only knew. But anyway, fortunately, quite a bit of my career was news adjacent, so none of those classes went to waste. Now, about those classes, this was back in the day, and maybe this was just my particular instructor's preference. You had to spend that whole first semester drilling down on journalistic ethics before they would let you loose on a single story assignment for the school paper. Can you imagine that?
I love that. That makes me very happy to hear.
For context, this was more than 30 years ago.
I hope that is still a policy.
For the record, I am very happy to be doing this instead of doing news right now.
Yeah.
But we were taught to take this very, very seriously. And even later, I was super serious about that stuff once my work was in the field of broadcast news, even though I was not a reporter. From that perspective, I have real thoughts on how this show was put together and how a lot of its descendants are put together. Look, in 63, you already knew Olds was perhaps not the best specimen of humanity. Even in prison, he still has a bare minimum of rights, or he's supposed to. And it's at about the time Lee Marvin is asking Michael Olds' film footage somewhat leading, opinionated questions that almost certainly were not asked of Michael Olds in that interview. I really found myself questioning the ethics of this whole show, up to and including Gene's participation in it. The crimes Olds committed and confessed to, and was tried for, they are a matter of public record. Yes, they are. The producers of this show, the writer working on the script, all of it delivered by Lee Marvin as the frontman, they all have a right to comment on it. Does Michael Olds have a right to not have this spliced-together interview hit the air, assuming that he was even aware that this was going to be on TV, with Lee Marvin probably asking questions differently than the questions Olds was asked? And look, I totally get a bunch of you are probably about to hit the comments right now telling me, this guy gives up the right to not be exploited like that the moment he harms another human being. I get that. It is still the cusp of a very slippery slope. The entire American prison system, now, not in 1962, well, both 1962 and now, hinges on questions like these, because sometimes what happens in our prison system kind of rhymes with the last vestiges of slave labor.
Yep.
Someone needs to be asking these questions. It's not an issue that has gone away because shows like these, the descendants of lawbreakers, and we've name-checked a few of them, they're still with us today, they're all over the schedule. They continue to effectively conduct their own trials of the persons involved, and now they don't even wait for the verdict to come in necessarily.
Yeah.
People eat this stuff up. And for the record, it has come up in requests for retrial or changes of venue because you had this stuff hit TV, and it has, as they say, poisoned jury pool.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole cable channel now, at least one, whose schedule is just wall-to-wall shows like these, both old and new. For all I know, Lawbreakers is still in reruns, and I just don't know it. I question what this stuff is doing to due process.
Yeah. I think that all of that is very fair to ask. My hang-up with true crime stuff is I feel like I am being entertained by someone's trauma. Real-life trauma.
Put a pin in that, sis.
Okay, all right.
We're coming back to that in the wrap.
Yeah. And I love how you've brought up everything that you've just said about how the show is constructed. I think you also get to ask those same questions about Michael's mother, who was a 14-year-old girl who, we might want to issue a trigger warning, was assaulted, became pregnant, had the kid at 14, and, still a kid herself, could not support him, was, based on a little extra reading I did, was abandoned by her family.
She had her own issues to deal with. And, maybe we should be giving some kudos to her for recognizing I am not the person to raise a child.
Yeah, I can't take care of this kid. Assuming what I read was accurate, she apparently survived on the streets feeding him by stealing milk off of people's porches until he was 6 months old, which is a horrific tragedy. Folks, make no mistake, I'm not here to give anybody a lecture about, being pro-choice or not. But at minimum, if a woman or a young girl has a baby, there needs to be social services in place to help this girl, because not everyone is fortunate enough to have family who can or will support you, regardless of how you found yourself in that situation. So there are multiple traumas happening here, and there's no safety net for...
But we will serve it up for your entertainment in prime time.
Yes, exactly. And so I respect that she's like, I can't take care of this baby. And so I totally understand why she gave him up for foster care. And I have very minimal knowledge of how the foster care system works now. I only know some stuff secondhand from friends who have been foster parents or adopted children through foster care. But 17 homes seems like an irrationally large number to me, and I cannot figure out why that happened. I don't know what the circumstances of that were.
Yeah, and at some point it seems like, okay, even in the 50s, even in the 60s, at some point it seems like social services and what existed of a mental health care system should have been flagging that big time instead of just moving him on to the next one.
Right, because, I mean, the goal of foster care is reunification. Theoretically, that is the goal. Yeah. That is what I have always been told by people I know who have adopted through foster care or have been foster parents. The goal of foster care is reunification. If parents can show that they can support themselves, that if they have drug problems, they are clean, and they are, actively pursuing addiction counseling, they're employed, they're working, all positive things so the child can have a stable home to go to. If that is not the case, child is then, if available and safe to do so, put with the home of a blood relative. If that is not the case, child goes to foster family. And some foster families are only there to foster. Many foster families are foster to adopt. Now, why this poor man, when mom's rights, if she was not going to maintain contact, if she was not going to, or was not able to provide a safe home for the child, her parental rights should have been severed long time ago, when the child was very young, and she should not have had any more contact with him. That would have allowed him to go to a family who would have adopted, and he would have had a more stable home life. But think about this, if you've put into foster care at 6 months old, which is about the time this kid went into foster care, and you've been bounced to 17 different homes, that is a new home a year through high school.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. Like, this whole thing is a tragedy upon tragedy and failure of the social system to help these people. This is a soapbox issue for me, so I'm going to stop right now before this gets any angrier.
No, I totally get what you mean. Did he commit heinous acts that are unforgivable? Yes, but the monster that the system has to clean up is a product of the system.
Yes.
And no one seems to want to address that.
There's something also to be said. This guy has a history of criminal activity. Talking about 2 years earlier, before he does this murder that lands him life in prison, he strangled a kid and left him for dead. Apparently, also, he was wanted on a previous murder charge or something like that. Because that was what some of the footage was from. I was unclear, because then later, as you mentioned in trivia, he got out on parole, kidnapped a bunch of people, and killed 2 people. And then, as far as we know, if he is not deceased, still serving 2 mandatory life sentences with no chance of parole.
Proper mental health intervention at some point could have, I'm not going to say led to an ideal outcome, but an outcome that had less life-changing implications for other people.
Yeah.
But again, all served up for your entertainment. You heat up the TV dinner, we're going to watch him kill people again.
Yeah. something important to mention, because I know of some folks who have fostered and said foster child that they brought in proved to be a danger to their current family situation, and therefore had to not foster that kid for various reasons. And so I have to wonder if he has been bounced around to 17 different foster homes. Is this a case where, okay, you can only go to a foster family where there are no other kids present? Like, is this a situation where he's being proven dangerous or harmful, and that's why he's been bounced? Well, none of that comes up here. And I don't know if any of that is a matter of public record, or if we can find that information anywhere.
Oh, I'm sure it's in public record somewhere in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
But are we going to humanize him like that for this show? Hell no.
No. And again, me saying all of this is not at all to excuse anything that he did.
No.
Because, murder is bad. Like, killing people is bad. And you should not do it. Period. The fact that this guy didn't get the chair is kind of miraculous to me, and I'm going to only assume that is chalked up to some Oregon state law.
I believe his background and his mother's background were known quantities and did mitigate in trial.
Mm.
I believe I did read far enough to find some stuff indicating that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was about as much mercy as he was going to be shown.
Mm.
And, yes, it is more mercy than any of his victims had. But the point I think we are both trying to make is that at some point, some intervention could have happened that could have headed off his desire or ability to carry out these crimes.
Yeah.
And so, perhaps the reason the system is lenient is because the system recognizes a failure of the system.
Earl, you've mentioned several things to put a pin in. Let's start unpinning some of those from our metaphorical bulletin board.
Yeah, before it starts looking like Mariner's conspiracy board from Lower Decks.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's a good thing we know the lieutenant is up next. Finally! Woo! Because of all the paycheck gigs Gene has done. This is the paycheck giggiest one of them all. Giggity. There is not a trace of Gene Roddenberry to be found in this thing. None of his values, none of his personality. Anyone could have written this. But, probably because it was known that he was both a TV writer in need of work and an ex-cop, stuff like this and G.E. True landed in Gene's lap at a time when he needed to get some bills paid to tide him over until his show got started. Okay, I could totally sympathize with that. It is not like I am saying, oh, shame on you, Gene. I'm not saying that at all.
Mm-hmm.
At least in G.E. True, you got some hints of Gene's ability to sketch out interesting characters.
Yeah, it felt like he got to play in the sandbox a little bit, use his writer skills, like his fiction writer skills, to tell a true story.
Yeah.
Here, it's very cut and dry, just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah, it's just the structure of the show, and best I've been able to tell, this was the first or second one aired. That's kind of a question. There's no room for any part of Gene to shine through, and so anyone trying to track this down, I don't want to tell you you're going to be disappointed, but as paycheck gigs go, I have had DoorDash orders handed to me at my front door with more passion and personality than this half hour of TV.
Truly, I agree.
I feel like this probably ranked up there with I Led 3 Lives, and maybe some half hours of Wrangler in terms of Gene being proud of having written it.
Yeah.
More than that, I found the implications behind the whole show disturbing for reasons I've already gone into. Because I've got some thoughts, and I've had them for many years, about the true crime genre getting to insert opinions into something that they are presenting as something that belongs in a journalistic space. But then, it's for entertainment purposes only. And therefore, they get to play looser with facts, and they get to be more aggressive about inserting these opinions. But then you extend the for entertainment purposes only thing into the rest of the news sphere, because you got it under the door with stuff like this. And that leads to where we are now, where we're pretty much in a post-fact economy, unfortunately. It's also a window into how political thought shifts over time. Gene Roddenberry and Lee Marvin were both well known for having very liberal politics. For the record, Lee Marvin was a sniper in World War II, who once went into a situation where the whole rest of his unit was wiped out. The man was as unfashionable as it was at the time. Lee Marvin was in therapy for a very long time because of this. I'm not sure if you all knew that. So, hey, let's cast him in The Dirty Dozen. Who thought that was a good idea? But, you know, I think he worked some stuff out in that movie as well. I don't know if you've ever seen The Dirty Dozen, but...
I haven't, and I didn't know that about Lee Marvin. That is insane. Like, I don't want to imagine...
No.
Experiencing something like that. But at the same time, I think that, you saying that he probably worked some stuff out in The Dirty Dozen, I think that's a really great, if anything, it's a plug for art as a component of therapy.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, in 62 and 63, some of the hard questions we now routinely ask about the criminal justice system, and especially about the monster that has evolved into the prison industrial complex. These things were not in the public conversation. Anyone who was posing those questions, they were quickly sidelined as anti-law enforcement radicals. Oh, their views are on the fringe. Their views are dangerous, because nobody wanted to take that up as part of the public conversation. But we're there now, I feel. Although, you know, there are a lot of people who would like to roll the clock back on that. Now, this show is like, of course, Michael Olds turned out bad. Look at how many foster homes he went through. There's a lot left on the cutting room floor there. And the show just kind of seems to arrive at, oh, if the guy's crazy, he's just crazy. And he's dangerous. Of course he's dangerous. Not going to spend 1 second of airtime digging into what fed that. I have very complicated feelings about this episode, Ashley, so I'm about to hand it over to you after I say that, look, I do understand Michael Olds committed acts of violence beyond most of our comprehension. I'm not saying he was a good guy. But again, going back to trivia, this was only the beginning of his story. And yeah, I get that too. But I get so hung up on the fine-grained tonal notes of how his story was told here. And I wonder if this show is actually doing anyone any kind of a service other than filling some station program director's airtime and making space for more commercials. Help me out here. What have you got? Is there anything redeeming about this half hour of TV?
I have to wonder if, at the time of airing, are people going to their local library and doing research and getting more of this story? Because I think if true crime does anything, because I think, some people just consume it because it's, a type of entertainment they find interesting. But I also know people who then will go and research and find more information and read these cases about what happened without the spin of making it into a drama or a documentary or something like that, which, again, can only provide so much perspective. Again, I've never taken any journalism classes, but I'm a very big fan of the truth. And my great-grandmother had a saying, and it is that the truth will stand when the world is on fire. As hard as that is to believe sometimes these days, I feel like I'm watching this now, and I want to go dig into this guy's story. I want to find out about his mother. We don't even get her name. We don't even get the name of the woman he killed. She's Mrs. Alfred Braum. Don't even do her the dignity of a first name.
Yeah.
And we don't get his mother's name at all. Just Michael Olds' mother. I mean, obviously the evidence is there. He did these acts his mother is still a firm believer, according to what clip we were shown. Again, we don't know when this was taken or how she was originally asked the question, but she believed in Michael's innocence. And maybe she believed in, the little boy that could have been. And that it's not his fault he turned out this way because of the circumstances under which he was brought into this world. And maybe that's what she means by innocence. Because that's all she said, I believe in my son's innocence. And I think this whole thing is just so tragic. And I don't really see anything of Gene. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this final quote, because I felt like the way Lee Marvin ended things in the episode where he asks the question, what's your opinion? Think about it for a moment. 17 different foster homes can give you 17 sets of values, 17 ways of life that can all be conflicting in a young mind. Or it can give you 17 ways to make good, all of them failing. What's your opinion? I thought the episode was going to end there. But then we get the statement from Frank C. Raymond, the chief of police of Seattle. He tells about Michael's sentence and, kind of gives like a cautionary warning. If you are contemplating this kind of crime,
we'll get you.
Yeah, we'll get you. And, think twice before you ruin your life and jeopardize the lives of others. And then, he gives this plea to me that felt like propaganda. The police know your communities better than you know the police. And my jaded perspective, sitting with my 2026 goggles, I don't know that that's true. Because I know cops who are good cops and genuinely care about their communities and work hard to, protect and serve as a cop should. But I don't know that's always the case. And maybe this is just me being super cynical. What do you think, Earl? Because you said something that, to you, that felt like the most Gene thing in here, if there is any at all.
Well, from his experience of having been an active duty police officer, that felt like a bit of Gene shining through. But you're right, where it gets taken, it's not a great place. What is your opinion? Well, yeah. What is your opinion after we have spent this whole half hour really putting our thumb on the scales of how this story is told? Yeah, what is your opinion, given what we have given you to form an opinion on? Unfortunately, we're having to ask this all the time now, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
We're in this post-Murrow, post-Cronkite era where just, whatever. From the training that I received in what I once thought at one point in my life was going to be my profession, it just runs so counter to everything that I believe about the way news should be done.
Yeah, agree.
And so, that last question, what is your opinion? That just makes me see red. Because it's like, well, now that we have presented a very selective slice of facts about this case, along with a lot of opinionated thumb on the scales, what is your opinion? This was a tough watch.
Agree.
This does not belong with the rest of Gene Roddenberry's body of work. And like I said, I know the guy's gotta pay the bills.
It's a paycheck gig.
But boy, is it an ugly paycheck gig.
Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at missionlogpod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and Mission-Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
On the next Gene-ology, a million miles from Clary.
Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Tom Kozak, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, and Paul Shadwell.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.